Participants. Now we are within the project Mend the Gap. We have special honor to announce one of the best geneticists in the world among, let's say, first 10, first 5. Clearly you will see why after his presentation. Eske has a lot of functions, honor director of biogenetics, one of the very, very interesting institutions producing a number of extremely interesting research. But maybe I should be short. Please, Eske, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. Okay, so, well, this talk is kind of an informal talk, right? It's mainly actually kind of towards my collaborators here. And but you know, over the last, I would say, eight years or so, my group has focused in research and trying to understand how did we obtain our genetic diversity, right? I mean, there's genetic diversity across the globe, you know, so how can it be that we today have Asians in Asia, Europeans in Europe, and so forth? What were the processes, you know, forming that genetic diversity we see in modern humans today? And the main, you can say, the main means of understanding this or addressing this is through what we call ancient genomics. So in 2010, my group sequenced the first ancient human genome, so it's kind of recording, if you want, the entire genetic code from, you know, an extinct individual, right? So over the last 8 years, you know, we have improved this technique. We've become better and better. And now, you know, from doing single ancient human genome studies, we can now do studies where it's more than, you know, for a single study, more than 100 ancient human genomes. So it's, you know, it's both in terms of technical improvements, you know, for machinery, but it's also DNA extraction techniques and so forth that have allowed us to do this. One thing I just want to mention briefly, and it's mainly for you guys, just so you know, is that it's also beside the ancient human genomes that this talk will be about. This will be about how you can, what kind of information, what kind of questions you can address using ancient human genomes, but it's actually also possible to reconstruct what we call the ancient epigenome. And the epigenome is reflecting, you know, how the genome is expressed, okay? And this is an area, you know, so it's expressed differently, for example, with regard to how the genome is wrapped upon nucleosomes, for example, or whether certain bases in the genome is methylated or non-methylated, okay? So I'm an identical twin, for example. So in principle, my genome should be identical to my twin brothers. But still there's differences. I mean, if you know as well, you can see differences. And those differences are most likely coming from the epigenome. It means how the genome is expressed. And you can reconstruct it by basically using the DNA damage. So over time, the genome will be damaged after death, you know, take an ancient skeleton, for example. But it will be damaged differently depending on whether it's wrapped across nucleosomes or between nucleosomes, or whether the bases are methylated or non-methylated. So you can actually reconstruct this, and this has huge potentials. It's just not explored really yet. I mean, you, for example, in principle, you can tell the age of a person, of a skeleton, based on the epigenome. There's a lot of diseases that are, you know, connected to the epigenome and so forth. So I just wanted to let you know that we can also do this. But of course, just to return, I mean, what my group is mainly focused on is, you know, how has this genetic diversity been created among modern humans, and this is the genomic diversity. So we have been working in different parts of the world, and I'll go through that in this talk. One of the areas we have been very interested in is early peopling of the Americas. And this is because North America and South America is believed to be the last continent that was populated by humans. So if we can't figure out what was going on in the Americas, I think there's very little hope we can figure out what was going on in the rest of the world, right? Where there's much deeper history. Still, you know, it's one of, you can say, the areas of human history that remains highly, highly debated. And so there's many different theories, everything from the kind of classical schoolbook version that, you know, the first humans getting into the Americas are coming around 14,000 years ago, crossing the Bering Strait between Asia and Alaska. It was covered by language at this time. You know, they're getting in here and then they're kind of stuck in Alaska because there's two massive ice caps blocking the way. And, you know, at some point these ice caps are melting back, creating a 1,500 kilometer long ice corridor. Humans are moving south of the ice very quickly into South America, and on the way they're killing off all what we call the megafauna, which are these big-bodied mammals like woolly mammoths, mastodons, you know, all these animals, and you know, populating the continents, starting with what is known as the Clovis technology, with these huge spare points that some people believe we used to kill off the megafauna. But this is kind of the schoolbook version. Then there's, you know, researchers will argue, well, people came into the Americas well before Clovis times, and they bypassed the ice caps by moving along the west coast. I mean, basically bypassing the west coast. There's some people who have argued, well, the first people in the Americas are not Native American ancestors. It's actually another people who were there, and then they were replaced by Native American ancestors coming in from Siberia later. So there's been arguments of them being Europeans because of similarities in tools between the Clovis tools and something called Solutrean tools in Europe around the same time, so they believe they came across the Atlantic getting in there. Other people have argued, no, it's an extinct Asian group of people getting in there, right? They're now extinct, but then replaced by Native American ancestors, and there's even been claims of the first people deriving from something very similar to Aborigine Australians. So you can see there's many different versions, and also when we talk about the Arctic part of North America, that is today inhabited by what we call Inuits. You know, some people argue, well, there was people in there before the Inuits, we know 5,000–6,000 years ago at least, and some say, well, it was a different people, others say the ancestors of Inuits, some people say it's Native Americans, and you know, you pick it, whatever version you want. And so, back a few years ago, we sequenced the first genome, ancient human genome from the Americas. And this was from a skeleton, the only skeleton, in fact, that is found in direct association with these Clovis tools. So it's very important because all the different theories all have a prediction of who Clovis should be, right? Is it a European? Is it a Native American? Is it another Asian? Is it an Australian? But what we could see here was that this child, 12,400 years old, is genetically speaking a Native American. Right? So it is now closer to Europeans or other Asians than are present-day Native Americans, and it falls within, you could say, the Native American cluster. So this was, of course, a major blow, if you want, to these other models, suggesting that somebody else had been in there. However, critics rightfully said, well, it's only one single skeleton, and America is very big. I mean, you could have something on the other side of the Rocky Mountains, for example, which is a barrier. So we sequenced probably the most famous skeleton in the Americas called the Kennedy Man. And this skeleton is very famous. It's 9,000 years old, so it's slightly younger than the Clovis skeleton, but it's very famous because it resulted in a 10-year-long court case between you know, the US government and Native Americans on one side and scientists on another side, archaeologists and anthropologists. Because when the skeleton was found, the first anthropologist looking at it looked at the cranial measurements and said, well, this is not a Native American, it's something that looks like a European. And everybody thought it was a farmer falling into the river and died. But then the C14 day came back and it was 9,000, close to 9,000 years old. And of course, this kind of raised the whole debate. Was there other people in the Americas early on than Native Americans? And the Native American groups in this area, 5 tribes, said we want him back, we want him repatriated because he's our ancestor. And the US government kind of lined up with the Native Americans and said, well, you can have it back. But then the US government was sued by a group of scientists going together saying, well, we can't return it, we won't return it because it's not Native American, it's something else. And that resulted in this long court case, and the Native American lost the court case because based on craniometrics saying it's not a Native American. They also tried to obtain DNA but failed. Then we got the remaining piece of the hand bone. It's actually a small hand bone. And from there we sequenced the genome. And it turned out to be 100% Native American. So actually just before President Obama left the White House, he signed off on the document, you could say, changing the outcome of the court case and returning the skeleton to the Native Americans. So, so far you can say what we have sequenced in the Americas of skeletons suggest a Native American kind of affiliation. Even there has been some claims of something people call Paleo-Americans. This is related to these two early skeletons where the facial structures look like, according to some, look like Aborigine Australians. And we have looked at what should be relict populations of these Paleo-Americans. It's like Fuegians and Baja Californians. And so far, I would say, I'm not saying that science can always change, right? You can always find something older and the whole story changes. This is the life of science. But I would say so far, based on the genetic evidence, there's nothing suggesting, if you want, that there has been other people in there before Native Americans. And also in terms of how they got there, whether they crossed this Beringian land bridge between Siberia and America. We got a skeleton recently sequenced from Alaska. They're very rare, these very old skeletons. This one was around 11,300 years old, child. And there you found the most basal group of Native Americans. It's not found today. We don't know any living Native Americans today belonging to this group, but it's basal. It's basically basal to all known modern living Native Americans or ancient living Americans. It diversified around 21,000 years ago. So my take on it, although I agree some people disagree with me, is that I think Native Americans got in, you could say the ancestors of Native Americans got into Alaska, at least by 20,000 years ago, and not 14,000, and probably even earlier than that. So where do Native Americans come from? I learned in school, maybe you learned that too, I don't know, that Native Americans is a group of East Asian people. It means a group of people that are today related to Japanese, Chinese, Koreans, and so forth. And they crossed the Bering Strait, and in isolation, they diversified to become Native Americans. By chance, really, we found out it's by no means that simple. So we sequenced a genome of a skeleton around Lake Baikal, here on the border between Mongolia and Siberia, dated 24,000 years old. And this is an area that today is occupied by Mongols, right? Various Mongol groups. So those would be the ones that you could call indigenous to the area. But this skeleton turned out to be not closely related to East Asians at all, like Mongols. It's closely related to Northern Europeans and even more closely related to Native Americans. And this, of course, was a major surprise because, first of all, it showed, well, if you go back in time, in some areas at least, there has been living different people than today. That's pretty clear. But secondly, it also showed that there is some kind of link between Northern Europeans and Native Americans that was not kind of thought of before. And you could say the most simple model, or I think the most likely model, and we have found some support for that, also unpublished, is really that Native Americans were formed between the meeting of at least two distinct groups of people. One was an East Asian related group, and then the other one was this Matar group that is not, you don't find them alive today. Okay, so it's a group that is extinct. I'll get back to when it probably got extinct in a moment. But it's really the meeting between those two, and you can say the children coming out of that meeting is genetically Native Americans. And we think that the meeting, we can calculate that the meeting is happening around 23,000 years ago, probably just on the border between Alaska and Siberia. So in terms of when did people get into the Americas, this is also something that is heavily debated. And it's, of course, you can say you need archaeology. I mean, archaeology is the way to say when did somebody be there. What was the, you can say, at least the earliest evidence you have. The problem is that in some cases, you know, maybe there's no tools left behind, and there's certainly, I mean, finding skeletons in the Americas is very rare. I mean, old skeletons. So the question is there other types of evidence? And I was contacted by an archaeologist called Dennis Jenkins, who is doing excavations in Oregon in a site called the Paisley Caves. And there you don't find really bones of people, he don't find much tools, but he finds hundreds of ancient feces, ancient shit basically. And he said to me, Eske, could you please find out whether it's a human who put this feces here or not? And the thing is, with feces you release, it contains of course the DNA of what you were eating, but it also contains DNA from the host because of cells being released in the intestines. So, you know, we got some of these feces, and to be honest, I didn't find it very interesting at first because whether somebody took a crap in the cave, that wouldn't bring us much further. But, you know, we ended up studying these feces samples, and it turned out that some of them, yes, they are from humans, and when you looked at the stratigraphy and also the direct dates of it, they turned out to be about 1,000 years older than the oldest evidence of Clovis. So this was really important because it means that there was definitely people in the Americas before Clovis. And with time, I mean, when we did this study, I was heavily criticized. I mean, it was like, you know, it's religious. This in the States, this is a religious debate. And but with time, more and more evidence has accumulated. Well, that people were there south of the ice caps. At least I would say, at least 14, 15,000, maybe even 18,000 years ago. And who knows, it could even be earlier than this. So what route did they take? I talked about, you know, there was this route in between the two ice caps, and there's the coastal route. And this has been two competing theories. And, you know, there's been a lot of attention to when the interior ice-free corridor opened, so you can physically move down there. But the other question is, of course, is it viable? Can people live there? It's 1,500 kilometers walk, right, with two ice caps on each side. I mean, and if any of you have been on the ice markets of Greenland, I've been there. It's a very unpleasant environment. I mean, thinking about walking that 1,500 kilometers, wow. So we decided to find out, you know, what is the biological succession history of the interior ice-free corridor. And there we used an approach that we also have used out here now in the caves. This was something I discovered during my PhD. So it is that you can take basically a small amount of dirt, ancient sediment, and in that sediment, it contains the DNA of the animals and plants that were living at that time when the sediment was part of the surface. Okay, so when it was part of the surface, and it's coming from, you know, feces, urine from animals, for example, it also contains DNA from, you know, fine rootlets of plants, you know, that has been shed into the environment, and, you know, in some cases, the physical structures are completely disappeared. There's nothing visibly in there as such. But the question was, of course, do the DNA survive? And yes, in some cases it does, and this is because the DNA is electrically charged, and so are many soil particles. So the DNA will bind to the soil particles, and that will reduce the rate of degradation. Okay, so you can just release it basically from the soil. Let me just see if I can get this to change. So this is exactly the approach we, together with the classical pollen studies and microfossil studies, we did that too. But we went to the interior ice-free corridor. Here you have Alaska, right? And this is the ice sheet in Siberia. And we went to the area of the ice-free corridor that opened the latest. this is the bottleneck area. And there we went to lakes in the winter time. There's ice on the lake, and then we could just stand on the lake ice and drill a core through the water column all the way into the sediments of the lake. And those lakes were also believed to be lakes at the time of the interior ice corridor. And then you can take, such a core, you can retrieve macrofossils that you see 14 date, so you can know an age profile of the core, and then you can extract pollen, macrofossils, and DNA. And from the DNA, you can say, then you can compare that DNA to the DNA of all known organisms that has been sequenced. And this is what we did, and you could get a very detailed record of the biological history. So in the beginning, there's nothing. There's only bacterial DNA. We only find bacterial DNA at the time when the corridor opens. But after around 2,600 years, what you start seeing then is a steppe environment. You see grasses, artemisia, and you find the DNA of woolly mammoth and bison, typically steppe animals. Then after a few more thousand years, you start seeing open populous forest, and the animal life is also changing into elk, which is red deer basically. And then after a few more thousand years, it changes into what we call boreal forest, with the spruce, and the animal life changes again to be dominated by moose, this is the environment you see today. And you can even find DNA of eagles, you can find the DNA of fish, when did the fish appears, and so forth. It's an amazing history, but what I would say in relation to the peopling of the Americas, it's very unlikely that there was anything to live from at the time when they already were south of the ice caps. So it's later on, it could certainly have been around, but for the first people, it's very unlikely. So it's much more likely that they actually took the coastal route. When we get to the Arctic part of North America, that's where we sequence the first ancient human genome from the top of here from Greenland, 4,000 years old, but we then collected many more samples, and also from living Inuits and Native Americans and Siberians and so forth. And it's pretty clear that there has been at least 2 independent migrations into the Arctic part of North America. So the first people, we call them Paleo-Eskimos, are coming in around 6,000 years ago, spreading across the Arctic, going all the way into Greenland. And here we find the last ones just 700 years ago. So they died out quite recently. And they are dying out as the second people are getting in there, namely the ancestors of present-day Inuits. They're getting in around 2,000 years ago in Alaska, but first around 1,000 years ago, they're spreading to the rest of the Arctic. And as soon as this is happening, the Paleo-Eskimos disappears. So within a few hundred years, they're just gone. And the Paleo-Eskimos, we don't know why, whether they were killed off or whether they were carrying diseases, but off they go. And they're very strange people because it's one of the very rare events where we don't really see any gene flow from the outside getting into the Paleo-Eskimos. So we don't see Native American DNA. Native Americans have already been down here for quite a while, but we don't see any Native American DNA going into the Paleo-Eskimos. So they seem to be living very much in isolation, and in fact they're extremely inbred. And when you look at the mitochondrial DNA, which is the DNA coming from the mother line, this is the only population I know of where every single individual has exactly the same mitochondria. So it's almost like it was one woman and a few men or 2 women or something like that basically gave rise to that population. So what was the impact of these early hunter-gatherers on, you could say, on the environment? This is something that has been very heavily discussed. It's still discussed, whether they actually really, you can say, had a global scale impact on the environment or not. And the discussion to a large extent surrounds around the so-called megafauna, late Pleistocene megafauna extinction. So if you go back around 10,000 years in time, you would see an environment, also here I'm sure, which was very different from today. And one of the things that makes it very different is that at this time, you have a huge diversity of big-bodied mammals. So you have, all the way up in Northern Europe, and you have elephants in the form of woolly mammoth, you have bison, you have woolly rhinoceros, you have lions, you have hyenas. So it's an environment that very much resembles what you see on the African savanna today, but just under, you can say, you have literally lions running around in the snow. And the majority of this megafauna is going extinct around 10,000 years ago. And we're talking of a mass extinction, around 2/3 of the animals are disappearing. And what is the reason for this mass extinction? So some people have argued, well, it's humans. It's these human hunter-gatherers that are basically killing off this megafauna. And we talk about a very fast, according to that model, a very fast extinction. It's called extinction by Blitzkrieg, which means it's coming in and within 1,000 years of first contact, bang, 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 they kill them all. Other people argue, well, it's impossible that humans, very relatively few humans with a pretty simple technology, could take off all this megafauna. They claim it's due to climatic changes. So it was the climate that was driving it. Of course, it's super important question, not only for this particular question, but if you think about it in the world we're living in now with climate change. Well, if it's climate change, right? I mean, climate change can have huge impacts on the environment if this is what's driving us. So some years ago we did what I think still is the largest ancient DNA study on this question. So we obtained DNA and analyzed DNA from 6 different species of megafauna: woolly rhinoceros, woolly mammoth, wild horse, reindeer, bison, steppe bison, and muskox. And these are representing 3 animals that went extinct and 3 that still survived. And then what we also did was something called climate niche modeling. And this is, for example, well, each of these animals, we had more than 100, specimens from all over, from Europe all the way into North America. And the climate niche modeling, there you take advantage of, for example, well, I found a woolly rhino here in Siberia at this spot. I dated to be this age, it could be 30,000. And then you say, well, what do we know about the climate in, the temperature and precipitation in this area at that time? And then you extrapolate, right? Because if you imagine you have a number of points, you can kind of say, well, this is the niche in which the woolly rhino liked to live, if it was only influenced by climate, okay? And this was one thing we did. The other thing we did was to revisit the archaeological record to kind of say, okay, how many woolly rhinos, for example, are people actually having bones of at different time points in different places, okay? And what we could see, first of all, was there's a statistical correlation between changes in population size, what we call effective population size, and changes in climate. And what this suggests is that climate is a major driver, for some reason, of these events. On the other hand, with the humans, there's a number of cases you can say where it's very hard to see how humans could have caused the extinction. If you take muskox, for example, at the time when muskox go extinct in Europe and in Asia, it's now still found in Canada, northern Canada and Greenland, but it also lived in Asia and Europe. But at that time, you can say in those places where there's no evidence of human occupation, okay? So, I mean, I'm not saying that humans couldn't have taken out some of the populations, but it seems like the major driver here is really, you can say, the climate. And what is it then about the climate? Well, in order to address this, we went and collected, I actually did this since my PhD. Every time I went to the Arctic, I had a drill with me and a freezer, and I collected more than 200 permafrost samples across the Arctic, over many years, drilling and keeping. And at some point, we decided, okay, let's try to analyze this for animal and plant DNA. So you could say over a period of 50,000 years, we could reconstruct the flora. And what we could see was that between 50 and 30,000 years ago, the flora was very different from today. So it was much more diverse, many more species, and it was also different types of plants. So the very dominant one is what we call forbs. which is kind of a flowery, grass-like type plant, but which is very nutrient-rich. And then we get to the last glacial maximum, which is the coldest period of the last ice age. It's a very harsh environment, and the diversity drops, but it's still a subset of the original diversity. There's still many of these forms. Then it becomes warm again, and we might all think, I thought at least, very naively, well, then you would return to something very similar to the last time it was warm, but not. You're actually getting a complete shift in vegetation, and we're getting the vegetation that we know of in these areas today with dominance of shrubs and grasses, and the forbs are declining heavily. Then we were allowed, sometimes you find mummified bodies of woolly mammoth and bison and woolly rhinoceros, where you have the intestines preserved. So we were allowed to take a sample of the intestines of these animals and sequence it, and there we could see that the dominant food source were the forbs. And then to a lesser extent the grasses, but the forbs was the dominant food source. So I think the most simple explanation here is really climate is driven a vegetation change, and the vegetation change is really causing a massive stress of the herbivores. And that's really what causes the collapse, right? And it's also what we see when we look at the oldest genome sequence today. We sequence the genome from a horse in Alaska that is 700,000 years old. And when we reconstruct, you can actually reconstruct a population history from a single genome of this horse. Well, it also turned out to be, very much following the reflection of what we know about climate change. So it really seems that these animals are heavily affected. In fact, you can also use that genome to address a very important question in conservation biology, namely whether there's any true wild horses left. So all the horses, also the ones on this island here in the center, I heard there should be some wild horses. All these horses are domestic horses going wild secondary, okay? So the only candidate for true wild horses is what we know as the Przewalski horse in Mongolia and these areas. But of course, it has been surrounded by domestic horses for thousands of years. And the question was, is there any full-blood Przewalski horses left? I mean, and this is important for conservation because you want to conserve them, right? You want to protect them. And which one should we protect? And the problem has been that because all the other horses are domestic, you have no genetic signature of a wild horse at that time. But I can guarantee you our 700,000-year-old horse was wild. There was no humans in that area at that time. So you could use that as a reference and actually find out, well, there is in fact individuals of Przewalski horse that doesn't seem to be mixed. Later on in this talk, if we have time, I will show you there's a twist to this story, because actually it turns out that even the Przewalski horse is also domesticated, but we didn't know that at this time. And it's certainly the most wild one we have. But, okay, so what about other places in the world? We also work with Australia. So Australia is, the people of Australia, origins of Aboriginal Australians, is very important to the debate of how modern humans left Africa, okay? Because, some people have argued, well, humans left Africa once. I mean, we all originate from Africa, but, humans left once, and then they spread to the rest of the world, and Aboriginal Australians are really just a branch of, you can say, what we call East Asians, right? So we have a European branch and an East Asian branch, and out of the East Asian brand is coming the Aboriginal Australians. And this is because, the few markers that have been used at this time genetically suggested that Aboriginal Australians are closer to East Asians, such as Han Chinese, compared to Europeans. We decided to sequence the first Aboriginal Australian genome, and we did this from a tuft of hair that was around 100 years old. And the reason why we did that 100-year-old sample was that in southwestern Australia, where this sample is from, white people, if you want, Europeans, only got in there around 100 years ago. So therefore, there was a very high probability that there was no recent mixture if we had an individual born around 100 years ago. And we sequenced the genome, and then we could see, no, it's not how the story is. You know, what you see is really that Aborigine Australians is diversifying from other, you can say, modern humans, as we call them, you know, some 20-30,000 years before East Asians and Europeans are diversifying from each other, okay? So then they are traveling, they're really, you can say, the descendants of the first, I would call human explorers, modern human explorers, that, you know, kind of, you know, went out of, you know, the Africa and the Middle East and kind of went into the rest of the world. And there they are crossing all the way into Australia and Papua that at this time are connected. And they're reaching there, archaeology has shown us that they're reaching there around 50, 60,000 years ago. I mean, remarkable journey. And at this time, we couldn't really tell whether, you know, this split took place outside Africa or within Africa. But we made a follow-up study where we did the first population genomic study on Aborigine Australians. So we sequenced 100 living Aborigine Australians across Australia, and there we had enough power to try to infer this. I would say I'm not guaranteeing you that this result will not change because, you know, we still have limited sequence data from Africa, but it looks at least like it's really one migration out of Africa, and then probably in the Middle East. That's where Aborigine Australians first take off, while our ancestors are sitting and saying, oh shit, the world is really big and dangerous. And then, you know, some 20, 30,000 years later, we start moving into, you can say, Europe and Asia and so forth. So in related to this story is, of course, Asia, Southeast Asia, because this is where the Aborigine Australians, the ancestors, are traveling through. And there's also been a lot of debate. I mean, is Asia, East Asia, has it a long-term continuity? I mean, is it the same people who are coming in there and then surviving until very recently? Or has there been migrations of various kinds getting into Southeast Asia? For example, with the arrival of agriculture, rice agriculture. And there the genetic data, we sequence the number of ancient individuals here. And what is pretty clear is that if you just go back around, you know, before 4,000 years, the people living on the mainland are genetically basically similar to what we call Andaman Islanders today in Southeast Asia. Andaman Islanders is a group of people, pygmies, that are looking like Africans, but they're living in Asia. And they're living in small pockets on islands, but when you go back earlier than 4,000, they are all over the mainland. At 4,000 years ago, what you see is a gene people moving from China and from Taiwan, coming in, mixing up with these, with the pygmy, with the Andaman Islander-like people, you know, and later again, there's one more movement from China in there. So all the East Asian groups, Thais, and all these people that we know of today is really a creation of a mixture between the original inhabitants that looked like Andaman Islanders and people coming from China. So it's a mixture between those two groups. And these Andaman Islander-like people are fairly reasonably closely related to Aborigine Australians. So this was some of the people who kind of stayed during that first wave going into Asia. We have even looked at adaptations. This is what we talked about earlier. Adaptations among some of these East Asian people. So, for example, you have what is known as sea nomads. So it's people in Southeast Asia that basically spend all their time on the ocean. So when they get into land, they become seasick. So they can't function properly on land, and they can stay for enormous amount of time underneath water. They don't have any diving equipment. I mean, they can just stay there. And the thing is that when you dive, make a free dive, basically what you're experiencing in the body is what is known as hypoxia, right? I mean, your organs get depleted of oxygen. And this is something which is very important in various types of medical research. Because if you go for surgery, for example, people are dying because they got hypoxia, in some of their organs. So of course it's very interesting to know what genes are involved in the phenomenon of hypoxia, right? Because then you could make in principle a genetic test and say, oh, are you one of those that are very sensitive to hypoxia, or are you not before you go to surgery? And we thought that, well, maybe we can actually find out what genes are involved in hypoxia by investigating these C-normals. So the one thing we first did was we measured the size of the spleen, because the spleen is where you carry the red blood cells, that you are using, that are transporting the oxygens around in the body. And we found out that these C-normals had 50% larger spleens than the relatives on land. But secondly, when we looked at the genome and looked at regions in the genome under selection, it means genomes, that it's a genetic part that we can see have had an importance for survival and reproduction. Those genes turning up here were the ones involved in spleen size and in the diving response. The diving response is that if you get cold water into your face, your veins will retract, your spleen will pump out red blood cells and so forth. So in this way, we could identify genetic regions that are important for hypoxia, you see? So this is a very useful way. I mean, one of the best ways to do this is really to find populations that naturally around the world, I don't know, here it could be against seasickness or something, but where, people who have adapted to a particular situation, in the world, and then you study them relative to a control group, right? And it's this was only based on, I think it was less than 100 actually genomes of these guys. Normally, when you want to find these kind of associations, as it's called, it's like tens of thousands of genomes. It's one of some of the most expensive studies, right? This was done for nothing. In comparison, it gave much stronger result. So it's, okay, what about Europe? Europe, has been populated, as far as we know, around maybe 45,000 years ago by modern humans, atomic modern humans. Who these people were was very debated. And we sequenced, back some years ago, we sequenced the first Upper Paleolithic human genome for Europe. It's from a site called Kostinki 14. This individual, Kostinki 14, and it's between 36 and 38,000 years old. So you can say it's not the earliest, but it's quite close. And what we could see is that Kostinki 14 is not, you can say, it's not an ancestor of present-day Europeans, but it is closer related to present-day Europeans than to any other contemporary population in the world. So it does suggest some degree of continuity in Europe. We even used also for these Upper Paleolithic, we did something different with ancient genomics. Namely, we tried to say something about, you can say, the sexual behavior of these Upper Paleolithic humans. And we did that investigation by looking at a site very close to Kostinki, which is close to Moscow in Russia, a site called Sungir, which is about the same age. But what is unique to Sungir is exactly like you guys have up there on the hill you showed us, namely that you find multiple individuals from the same site, from the same time, right? So instead of just looking, as we have done so far, you look at one individual there and one individual, in another country, and then you try to find out how they mix and so forth. We are basically sequencing the genome of multiple individuals from the same place. And this allows you, first of all, to calculate, what we call effective population size. It means how many people did they come from, right? How big a population. We could see, maybe not very surprisingly, Kostinki here is coming from a very small population size. The next question was, to what extent are these people inbred? Because some people have argued, that Upper Paleolithic humans, and in particular here at Sungir, they were inbred because they were living in so small population sizes and didn't really have much contact. When we looked at this, there was no evidence of inbreeding whatsoever. The next question you can ask is, how related are these individuals? And surprisingly enough, they were not closely related. Even the ones in the same grade, they were all, you can say, third cousin or further out. You know, even one of them had even a human bone filled with red ochre, and the people have speculated it was a Neanderthal, but in fact it was a modern human, we can see that, and it's not a close relative. So they are all, you can say, so what it tells you is that these people in the Upper Paleolithic, at least here, these people we're looking at here, they, you can say, even though they were living in small population sizes, probably 20-25 individuals most of the year, they do understand the concept, you know, to some extent, of difference between inbreeding and outbreeding, right? They are going out and getting mates from other groups, so they are avoiding inbreeding. And this is what is interesting relative to Neanderthals. We don't have that data from Neanderthals. But what is interesting about the Neanderthal genomes is that basically all of them except one is extremely inbred. Extremely inbred. So you do wonder whether that could have played a role in terms of why did Neanderthal go extinct versus modern humans. Of course, this about inbreeding and outbreeding is not a problem if you are, I mean, a relatively large number, I mean, on the landscape, I mean, if you're just made randomly, you know, but there's enough of you, you know, you will survive. Some of them will survive, right? While some will get inbreeding diseases and disappear, but, you know, there will be people surviving. But of course, when there becomes very few people on the landscape, this strategy becomes crucial. And, but in order to do this kind of study, you would need a place where there's multiple individuals from the same time, from the same place. Then you could do the same thing. Like your side. But anyways, okay, so for modern humans in Europe, you can say there's not that much, as far as we can see happening. It's also not very well investigated, I must say, until you can say around 10,000 years ago. Then something major is happening. And culturally, this is that you are getting what we call the agricultural revolution. People go from being hunter-gatherers to becoming farmers, okay? And it has been really heavily debated in the literature what caused this change, this massive change in lifestyle. Was it the same people learning something new, or was it another people coming, even replacing the original peoples in Europe? And this was the early study. We did that together with some Swedish colleagues, the ones that you're working with now, Jakobsen's group, because we sequenced you know, a number of late hunter-gatherers in southern Sweden and early farmers. And what it turned out was that the late hunter-gatherers are looking very much genetically like Eastern Europeans, while the early farmers are looking like Greeks. And how can this be? Well, it actually looks like there's a climb through Europe, so the further northeast you go, the more people look in generally like hunter-gatherers, the late hunter-gatherers. The more south you go in Europe, the more farmer-like you be. And what this suggests, and this has been confirmed later on by many other groups, is you have a migration coming from the Middle East and Near East, bringing agriculture with them. In southern Europe, they have a lot of sex. They have so much sex that, in fact, many southern European genomes are really, you can say, reflecting these early farmers. When they move north, for some reason, their desire for sex seems to decrease, and when they get to the northeast of Europe, it almost stops. And, you know, you are delivering kind of, you know, your package. Please do like this when you want to be a farmer, but no sex, thank you. and therefore, you can say you have this kind of gradient through Europe, right? So, I mean, in the south, you're very farmer-like. In the northeast, particularly, you're very hunter-gatherer-like. This change in lifestyle had a massive implication on us as our biology, and we have by no means discovered all of it. But what we can see, for example, very easily in the ancient genomes is that it has changed our digestive system, for example. So when you are hunter-gatherer, you're living mainly from meat and fish and berries and things like that. And meat and fish provides you with something which is essential for you, namely long-chain fatty acids, that for example are used in the brain and so forth. But when you change your diet to muesli, to basically corn, well, you're not getting the long-chain fatty acids, you're only getting short-chain fatty acids. And you need to change that into long-chain fatty acids for getting it to work in the body. So we can see there has been a selection of what is called the FATS gene region that is exactly doing this, that is changing. So this is, you can say, an attempt to adapt to the new food. And I'm sure we will see many more, because this change in lifestyle is extreme. Both in terms of how much you move or little you move, what you eat, right? Social structure and so forth. Okay, after, how much time do we have? Do we still have time?
No, use the time.
They sleep, so
No.
Okay. After the nuditization, as it's called. Now we have been turned into farmers in Europe. And what happens next? Well, in the so-called Bronze Age, right, which is starting around 5,000 years ago, there, of course, again, you have really significant changes in lifestyle. For example, how people bury their dead, the type of material you're using, religious beliefs, family becomes the nuclear family becomes very important, and so forth. And people have again discussed, well, is this due to a migration, or is it just the same people changing? And we did a study to try to look into this, and this showed very clearly in the Bronze Age, around 5,000 years ago, you had a very significant migration going into northwestern Europe. At least no one knows yet how it is really with southern Europe. But it's coming from the hunting steppe here on the border between Asia and Eastern Europe, so Eastern Europe. We have this Yamnaya people, Yamnaya culture. It's pastoralists moving into Europe. But we also found evidence that you have a movement east into Central Asia. And this is very interesting for a number of reasons, but one of them being that this fits perfectly with some theories on the early spread of the Indo-European languages. So the Indo-European languages are the most abundant language families spoken today. Right? It's spoken by some 42% of the world's population are speaking Indo-European languages. And of course, linguistics and others have for a long time been interested in knowing when did this language originate and how did it spread to the world. And there's been different models suggested that varies in terms of time and origins. But exactly this pattern by spread from the Caspian steppe into Europe and into Asia fits perfectly with the so-called steppe hypothesis of early spread of the Indo-European languages. And there's no doubt that in Europe this seems to fit, because our European genetic diversity today is very influenced by Yamnaya. So if you look at the gray spots here on the map, that is representing contemporary European genetic diversity. Here we have the late hunter-gatherers falling outside that diversity, the early farmers also falling slightly outside that diversity. But during the Bronze Age, this is really where a lot of the genetic diversity that characterize us as Europeans today is getting created. So very late in our history, just 5,000, within the last 5,000 years. But what about Asia? Well, we found for sure Yamnaya in Asia. No doubt about that. You see Yamnaya there. Why is it not changing? Just one moment. Yeah. We see Yamnaya in Asia, so they certainly went in there, but they had the same impact as in Europe. No, they did not. We tested that by going into Central and Western Asia, collecting samples from people living there just before and after the Bronze Age. And we got very surprised, because first of all, these peoples genetically do not look at all like the people living in Central and Western Asia today. Very different. And they also don't look like Yamnaya at all. But what do they look like? Well, they look like this group of people that contributed to the Native Americans, right? So this group of people in the Upper Paleolithic, 23,000 years ago, we don't see them today contributing to Native Americans very significantly. We thought they died out back then in the Stone Age, but in fact they survived at least up to 5,000 years ago. And they survived here in Central Asia. They're directly descended from this group. But not only that, these are also the first people that we know of domesticating the horse. So this is a site in Kazakhstan called Botai, which is about 6,000 years old. And there you have the earliest archaeological evidence of horse domestication, if you want. You find the teeth of the horse and marks after bristles. In the pottery you find milk residues. You also find fences and stuff like that. So these people were living in here, and some people have suggested that this horse domestication was really done by the Yamnaya-like people, and then they taught, the Botai people how to domesticate the horse. But what we do see is, in fact, these Botai people, they are the descendants of this Maltar child, as we call it, that contribute to Native Americans, and they get absolutely no G-flow from Yamnaya. Absolutely none. And in fact, all these Central Asian groups, only one of them get a little bit, and that's it. So, two things here. It seems like that horse domestication event was actually, you can say, happening as a result of a hunter-game relationship. We know that these people were hunting horses, as a part of living, and at some point one is probably jumping up on one and tries to ride it, right? And we can also see that the Yamnaya, although they came across Western Central Asia, really had no impact there. Basically non-impact. So you can say that part doesn't fit with the so-called steppe hypothesis of early spread of the Indo-European languages. The same is, or I should maybe make just a note, that ironically, that horse they domesticated, so to speak. They didn't manage spreading that to the rest of the world. So it's kind of, it's tragic irony, right? These hunter-gatherers are making what probably is certainly among the most important cultural achievements in human history. It completely changes human history when you domesticate the horse, right? But they don't manage to kind of make a commercial out of it and spreading it to the rest of the world. So somebody else do it again, and this is the one that kind of gives rise to all the domestic horses we have today. And in fact, the poor Botai people go extinct, and their domestic horses are going into the wild and seem to be the Pasmanski horse. So it's it's really sad. They really got it right, but not the commercial part of it. But also in terms of the steppe hypothesis, when we get to Anatolia, which is basically present-day Turkey, there you find the oldest written evidence of Indo-European languages. It's what is known as Hittite. So Hittite is an extremely early branch of Indo-European languages. And of course, according to the steppe hypothesis, where you have the Yamnaya spreading it should come with Yamnaya. But when you sequence Hittites, the Hittites we've sequenced so far has absolutely no traces of Yamnaya. So there's something with this steppe hypothesis when it comes to Anatolia and Asia where it really doesn't seem to fit very well. The people that has a huge influence in Asia, the first people, I mean there's several people, but the first people is really the next wave of Bronze Age expansions, which has different names according to where you are geographically, but it's really genetically the same people. Also culturally, we call them Zoroastrians. And Zoroaster comes from Europe. They have developed the first chariots, war wagons, pulled by horses, and they're just moving across the Asian steppe. And those are the guys, most likely, that takes out the Botai and all these other local people there. Yamnaya didn't manage, but Zoroaster managed. So they have people, one is riding the wagon and another one is an archerage shooting, and it's an extremely efficient war machine. And in fact, it has been very much discussed how did the Indo-European languages go into India and Pakistan, right? Because in northern India and Pakistan, you just say if I should stop, right? If you get too tired. No, it's okay, okay. So India and Pakistan, they are in the northern part, they speak Indo-European languages, okay? And in fact, we have known for a long time that some groups in these places also carry, you can say, European genetic ancestry. And so they carry two types of European ancestry. They carry something that looks like Yamnaya-like, and they carry something that looks like Neolithic Iranian. And some geneticists said, well, you know, this came with Yamnaya. It was Yamnaya that brought this genetic ancestry and fit very well with them bringing the Indo-European languages. However, archaeologists said, no, it cannot be the case, because archaeologically you don't find really any traces of Yamnaya. What you do find traces of is Santasta. So what the problem is that Santasta, while not Yamnaya nor Santasta, carries, you know, the Neolithic Iranian component. So this was the big question. And what we then found was that just north of India and Pakistan, you have a Copper Age group called the Namaska. And the Namaska is, you can say, carrying both these components. So most likely they gave, you know, the majority of the European-like ancestry we see in Indians and Pakistanis. However, they are not Indo-European speakers. But what we could then see was that a few of the Indian and Pakistani populations actually need an additional European input to kind of explain how they look like, and this is can be explained with Santasta. So it's probably, you know, somebody very close to Namaska that are providing most of the genetics, making them look like Europeans genetically, but it's really the Santasta that most likely are providing them with the language, although genetically they're leaving quite a few traces behind. So anyways, what happens then after the Bronze Age? I will be finished soon. Very soon. Okay, so what happens after the Bronze Age? Well, now we had the Yamnaya expansion, we had the Santasta expansion, but both Yamnaya and Santasta are, you know, they are European, genetically they are European people, right? I mean, they are related to Europeans, and what you see today in Central and Western Asia is East Asian people. So something must be going on here. And this is going completely crazy. And this is because now we have the domestic horse. The domestic horse is changing everything. And if you have ever been, I visited the steppe when I participated in the excavation at the Botai. It became very evident for me, you know, the steppe is like a highway. I mean, it's short grass, right? It's really flat, it's like a highway. You just are larking the car. Suddenly you're getting the car with the horse, and everybody goes just totally mad. So the next thing happening is really that you get the so-called Scythians. The Scythians in Eastern Europe and Central and Western Asia are mounted warriors. Even the women are warriors, riding on horses, bow and arrow, and people have been discussing who are these Scythians, where did they come from? And some have argued, well, they came from the Black Sea area, others said, well, they came from southern Siberia. They have a very homogeneous culture, you know, spreading from all the way from Eastern Europe all the way up to, you can say, East Asia. It's very homogeneous culture, but when we sequence them, we could see they are extremely different from each other. It's actually quite interesting. So some of them are clearly the descendants of the Santasta, but others are East Asian, more East Asian in origin. And what is really odd is they have this very homogeneous culture, but there seems to be almost no gene flow between the different groups. And this is the step, right? I mean, you can just go back and forth, but they somehow, this is an example of cultural spread, if you want, without genetics, right? Geneticists always think we can explain all spreads by a mixture. Well, this one we can't. So it certainly seems like this is happening. After that, the Scythians, they are disappearing as the Huns are getting in there. And people have been discussing who are the Huns and how do they impact Central Steppe and Eastern Europe and West Asia. And what we can see is, genetically, the Huns seems to derive from what is known as the Xiongnu dynasty, which is part of, you can say, China, southern Siberia, and Mongolia. And out of there, because we can see they fit perfectly genetically with the Xiongnu dynasty, out there comes the Huns. They have, this is why I show this picture, because they changed the head shape by kind of squeezing it, and then they get these long heads. That's what you see in the graves. And they are moving across the landscape. And you could say they're not killing off people really. What they're doing is they're mixing with people that are already living there, you can say the cities. But they have a huge linguistic impact, because the steppe area has been Indo-European speakers, as we talked about. But these Huns, they are Turkic-speaking people. So the Turkish language is not coming from Turkey. Well, I thought that until I started working on this, but I realized, no, this is not the case. The Turks, if you want, in Turkey is a Middle Eastern people taking up the Turkish language. But the Turkish language are originating from China, Mongolia, coming with the Huns, and basically, they're completely transforming the linguistics of the steppe into Turkish speaking as people are today in those areas. After that, we have various types of Mongolian groups. The most famous is, of course, Genghis Khan and his Golden Horde, but there's many others beside him that are getting into the steppe, spreading, taking control in a few hundred years, being replaced by another Mongolian group, getting in there, taking control. It's because it's the Silk Route, right? This is what they want. They want the Silk Route connecting the trade between Europe and Asia. But it's quite interesting with the Mongolian skeletons, because you hear in history that the Mongolian Empire was different, for example, from the Roman Empire, in that you could say they absorbed people, but they didn't demand them to change their cultural way, the religious way, for example. Right? The Romans is much more like the British. They're trying to, you can say, modeling whatever they take into their own image. And there was these stories of Mongolians, they ask people, do you want to join? And if you say no, well, you get your head chopped off. If you say yes, here's a bow and an arrow and a horse, let's go, right? And this is exactly what we see from the skeletons. So when you look genetically at the Mongolian warriors, in the burials with full Mongolian dress, well, next to each other is one line who's East Asian, next to it is a European-derived individual, right? So it fits very well. So what is now getting the torch very close to them? So what is driving these massive migrations? Well, I'm sure there's many different explanations, many different reasons, but one of them that was very surprised, I'm sure, is diseases. Because we found, basically by accidental, I would say it was really accidental, we found that about 10% of the Bronze Age population in Europe and Asia was infected by plague with the pestis bacteria. And this was a surprise, because the oldest written evidence of plague should have happened only suggests that the first epidemics happened 3,000 years later. So already 5,000 years ago, there was plague epidemics. And across Eurasia. And we can even, which is quite interesting, we can even follow the evolution of the plague bacteria. So the first version we see 5,000 years ago is the version that is spreading from human to human by blood and saliva. But in the end of the Bronze Age, it's getting that genetic mutations that allows the bacteria to survive in the flea god. And then it can be spread by fleas, as we know it in later history. But of course, this has been devastating, both in terms of making areas open for other people to move into, but also just trying to run away, right, from the epidemics. And in fact, when we look at the Justinian plague, which is much later and which caused, an extinction about 30%, is estimated 30% of the world population at this time. Massive impacts in Europe. There are people normally saying, well, it came from Greece. But when you look at the Huns, we actually, in two of the Hun warriors, we find the strain which is just basic to the Justinian plague. So it do suggest, I'm not saying these were the guys bringing it in, but it could very well suggest it's coming from the, you can say, from the steppe with the Hun nation. That's really where it's kind of coming in there, or maybe some of the later expansions into Europe from the steppe. But it's not only, and this is the last thing, so don't worry. You know, now I haven't shown, I forgot this picture of all the diseases we find. It's super interesting. I mean, I had this romantic, myself had this kind of romantic view of the past. I thought, you know, the past must have been really nice and, you know, living in the Bronze Age or something. But, I mean, these guys are completely infected with diseases. I mean, around 10% of the skeletons we find have some kind of really nasty disease. Leprosy, tetanus, you know, you name it, right? And even, I mean, this is hepatitis B, you know, and hepatitis B, which is even something quite significant today, I mean, causing cancer in the liver. You know, many people believe, you know, hepatitis B comes from the Americas and have only been in Europe for 500 years. We find it at least 5,000 years back in time. You know, people are super infected with this shit. And, you know, the thing is, you can look at the whole diversity. And this is where this type of research, I would say, could have direct implications for, you know, for healthcare. Because what we see with many of these diseases is that the diversity you're looking at today is a tiny, tiny subset of what was present just a few thousand years ago. And the thing is, this provides you, this past provides you with a catalog of what mutation in these diseases, in these pathogens, that are viable, I mean, can survive together, right? Obviously they were there, right, in this combination. And today, you know, this is not me doing this, but we're working with a group, they can actually revive these pathogens. So they can take, you know, we can take the genome and basically artificially reconstruct it, put it into a protein cap, and then you can infect, you know, a mouse or some other unlucky animal with it, and then you can look at the impact of the disease. And obviously, if you have had a mutation in the past, then you can get it again, right? So this provides you with an opportunity to say, okay, all these variants that has been in the past, do our current vaccine, do they actually cover that, right? And if the answer is no, well, then you can start looking at, well, how dangerous are these mutations, and if they are dangerous, well, you better start working on a vaccine that can cover those parts, because it can come again. So you really are getting this whole catalog of you can say, disease variants, which are really interesting. So anyways, this was almost all. I just want to say, of course, this work was not done by me. In fact, it was not all done by me. It was done by all the, you know, students, PhD students and postdocs at geogenetics, and, you know, was sitting sweating in the lab or at the computer, and you know, also with we have some collaborators, you know, associated with geogenetics, like Rasmus Nielsen, Christian Christiansen, who's an archaeologist from Gothenburg, Marta Lahr, Rob Foley, also from Cambridge, archaeologists, David Wells, also archaeologist from the States, and so forth. So yeah, thank you very much. So, any questions? Maybe you don't have time for that.
Some questions? I have thousands, but I will skip.
Okay,
we are traveling by the same ferry.
Yeah, we have 3 hours tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, good.
If there is no questions,
sure. Don't be shy. I mean, please.
Yeah, it's scientific community questioning is one very important part. So, and don't be shy, there are no stupid questions.
When you say don't be shy, then suddenly everybody gets shy. Don't be shy, no. But what are you doing here in Luka?
Oh, yes. So this is, I would really try to do this later today in your neighboring village. I will show some photos. So we've been working on these, or we've been working on one side and looking at the other. So one is this profile run by Preston. What is the site? I'm always so bad at names. Yes, exactly. And there we are taking sediment samples, like this DNA from the soil, to try to reconstruct how the environment has changed through time, and also to look for human DNA in there, to basically just through the sediments, okay? And then we have been looking at this wonderful, this is a very cool site. I must admit now, I've been learning all day, today and yesterday, about the archaeology here. I'm not an archaeologist. I'm just amazed. You have a fucking pearl here. It's amazing. No, it is really amazing. And I just heard about those two sites, and then came today and saw, there's like all these and these. It's amazing, amazing. But then we also visited yesterday, the grave with the many hundreds of child skeletons. And there again, we have taken some dirt to see whether we can find the DNA of the humans in some of the graves. So this is what we've been doing. But you have, as you can see, I've mainly been working in Northern Europe, right? And when I look at this, what you have in the museum, I got this tour, and the richness, both in terms of what you find, physically find, but also in terms of, you can say, cultural creations, if you want, in terms of, the paintings and colors. We are totally barbarians out there. It's like, it's clearly here what's kind of going on in Europe, So it's a very, very interesting, and it's been, to me, who is not an archaeologist and hasn't really been traveling much in Southern Europe, to be honest, it's really been an eye-opener. Of course, I've read about some of this stuff in books, but so this is what we're doing.
That's pity, because as you said, there is more sex in Southern Europe.
Huh? What?
That's pity, because as you told us, there is more sex in Southern Europe.
Yeah. That's true. Well, you certainly have an incredible history here. So, we did very little, from a genetic standpoint, very, very little is known about it at this stage. So the majority of the studies in Europe has been in Northern Europe. So we have, to what extent did Yanaya, for example, get here? Was the Indo-European languages here spread by Yanaya or with somebody else? No idea, right?
The preservation thing or just the sampling thing?
It has been a combination of both, I think. Obviously, you would expect that the sampling or the preservation in terms of DNA is better in Northern Europe. However, if you look, for example, at Southeast Asia that I showed here, right? Southeast Asia is probably the coolest environment for DNA preservation, and we can get it to work now. But back maybe just, I would say 3-4 years ago, it would have been, many of these skeletons here would probably have been a long shot. But now, the methodology is so good that, you can really retrieve DNA from very, you could say, from skeletons that you previously didn't think was possible. So it's changing, and that of course makes it very interesting. But the other issue is of course samples. You need collaborations in terms of samples and so forth, and we have. I explained to this afternoon, for example, for Greece, we got now human remains, but it took us 2 years, right? Just to get permits, it was like a nightmare. So it's a combination of both. But it will be very interesting to see what happens here in Southern Europe. And hopefully when I at some point return, maybe I will have more information on what is going on in Southern Europe.
More light? Acho que consegui isso.
More light.
More light.
look like I'm talking. Okay. Yeah. You can just stand.
Thanks.
Good.
Could my students take a photo with you?
Sure, of course.
You've got more things, so
Yeah.
Just before I would just add some one sentence like, thank you very much. I was thinking how to call this, and then I was thinking, this is the best, like, the very top science can be done in very small places. So this is like top science for the world, isn't it?
Sure. No place is too small for me. Okay, where should we do it?
oh, I think there is just more space. Yeah.
So, geogenetics is in Denmark, and Denmark is a country very similar of size to Croatia. So you young guys have opportunity. Sometimes you have like also geogenetics in Croatia, so you have like on the north and on the south.
Yeah.
Eske teaching about sex, we have look guys.
Thank you.
Good. Good. I hope you got enjoyed some of it at least.
We'll talk about it.
Thank you. Okay,
Thank you so much. Yes.
Great.
Okay, that's good. Oh, that's good. It's made right here high level for these high school people. But I mean, it was mainly for you, right?
For me it was better than our picture.
They can't have anything about sex and everything.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't do anything like technical. I think
No, I didn't do
super
anything.
like,
Yeah.
it's like it's so, yeah.
No, I think usually this was a very condensed tour of human diversity, but gets stimulating.
Uma família.
Tinha todo outro, né?